The officer's hand closed around the poor woman's wrist just as the bus doors hissed open. "Ma'am, don't move." Everyone at the station turned. A mother with 2 children pulled them closer. A businessman lowered his phone. A teenager started recording. The woman froze with 1 foot on the bus step, rain dripping from her hair, her coat soaked through, her old canvas bag pressed against her chest like it held her whole life. "Please," she whispered. "I have to get to Mercy General before visiting hours end." Officer Daniel Brooks looked at her torn sneakers, the muddy hem of her dress, the shaking hands wrapped around that bag. Then he looked at the man standing behind him in a black wool coat, pointing at her like she was dangerous. "That's her," the man said. "She took it. I saw her near my car." "Search the bag." The woman's eyes filled with panic. "No. Please don't." Officer Brooks had heard that sentence too many times. But when the bag slipped from her hands and spilled open on the wet sidewalk, a folded letter slid out. And the moment Daniel saw the name written on the front, the color drained from his face. Because the letter was addressed to him. Her name was Ruth Coleman, and for most of her life, people had looked right through her. She cleaned tables at a diner off Route 47 in Ohio. She rode the early bus, paid bills late, and carried grocery coupons in a rubber band because every dollar already had a place to go before it touched her palm. Ruth was not weak. Life had tried to bend her in every direction, but she never let it break the soft part of her heart. She had raised her daughter alone after her husband, Marcus, died in a warehouse accident 11 years earlier. Since then, Ruth had taken every shift she could get. Morning breakfast rush, afternoon dishwashing, night cleaning at a law office 2 towns over. She did not complain. Not when customers snapped their fingers at her. Not when landlords raised rent. Not when doctors spoke too quickly because they assumed she would not understand. Her daughter, Lily, was 16, bright, stubborn, and brave in the way children become brave when they see their parent hiding pain. 3 months earlier, Lily had collapsed during gym class. At first, Ruth thought it was exhaustion. Then came the tests, the hospital stays, and the words no mother is ever ready to hear. A rare blood disorder. Treatment possible. But urgent. Mercy General in Columbus had a specialist who could help, but there were forms, referrals, deposits, and waiting lists that seemed designed to crush people who were already tired. Ruth spent nights sitting beside Lily's hospital bed, pretending she was not afraid. Lily would smile weakly and say, "Mom, don't look like that. I'm still here." And Ruth would answer, "Then I'm still fighting." The problem was money. Ruth's insurance denied part of the treatment. The hospital charity board said her application was incomplete. A social worker quietly told her there was one more chance, a medical relief hearing with a local foundation connected to the hospital. "If you can get these documents delivered by Friday evening, they may review Lily's case Monday," the woman said. "But it has to be signed and delivered in person." Friday arrived with heavy rain and bad luck. Ruth's old Buick refused to start. Her phone had 8% battery. The neighbor who promised to drive her got called into work. So Ruth packed everything into her canvas bag. Lily's medical records, income papers, the letter from Lily's doctor, and one envelope Lily had begged her not to forget. It was addressed to a police officer. Ruth did not know why. "Just promise me you'll keep it safe," Lily had said, her voice soft under the hospital blanket. Ruth kissed her forehead. "I promise." She took 2 buses to the downtown transit station. That was where everything went wrong. At 5:18 p.m. Ruth stepped off the second bus and hurried across the station parking lot toward the Columbus Connector. A black SUV rolled up near the curb. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in an expensive coat stepped out, irritated by the rain. His name was Charles Whitman. Most people in town knew the name. Whitman Construction. Whitman Properties. Whitman Family Foundation. He served on the hospital charity board. He also owned half the buildings Ruth could never afford to enter. Charles had been at a donor meeting at Mercy General that afternoon, angry because the hospital wanted to approve more emergency charity cases before the annual gala. He believed some families took advantage of kindness. He liked saying things such as, "Compassion needs limits," usually while standing beside people who had never needed compassion from him. As he walked toward the station entrance, he saw Ruth bump into the side of his SUV while trying to avoid a puddle. Her bag slipped from her shoulder. Papers shifted inside. Charles checked his coat pocket. His envelope was gone. Inside it was a cashier's check for $50,000, meant for the hospital foundation. He had placed it in his pocket earlier. Or at least he thought he had. He turned and saw Ruth rushing away with her bag clutched tight. "Hey," he shouted. "Stop." Ruth looked back, startled, but the bus was already loading. Charles ran after her, anger rising faster than reason. "You took something from me." Ruth shook her head. "Sir, I don't know what you mean. Don't play innocent." People began watching. Ruth felt that old burn of shame. The kind that comes when strangers decide who you are before you speak. "I didn't take anything," she said. "My daughter is in the hospital. I need to get on this bus." Charles looked her up and down. "That's always the story, isn't it?" Those words hit harder than the rain. Before Ruth could answer, Officer Daniel Brooks pulled into the station lot. He was 29, 6 years on the force, the kind of officer who still polished his shoes before every shift because his father once told him, "Respect starts with how you show up." Daniel was tired that evening. He had spent the afternoon responding to a domestic call, then a car accident, then a shoplifting report involving a hungry teenager and a grocery store manager with no patience. When he saw Charles Whitman waving him down, he expected another argument over property, insurance, or somebody's pride. Instead, Charles pointed directly at Ruth. "She stole a foundation check from me. I want her bag searched." Daniel turned to Ruth. "Ma'am, is that your bag?" "Yes." "Did you take anything from this gentleman?" "No, sir." "I swear." Charles scoffed. "Of course she swears." Daniel's jaw tightened. He did not like the tone. But he also could not ignore an accusation involving a missing check. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the bus." Ruth's face changed. Not anger. Fear. Deep, desperate fear. "Officer, please. I have documents for my daughter's treatment. If I miss this bus, I miss the deadline." Daniel softened a little. "I understand, but I need to ask a few questions." "You don't understand," Ruth said, voice breaking. "That hospital closes the office at 6. Charles stepped closer. Then she should have thought of that before stealing. Ruth turned to him, tears mixing with rain. "I did not steal from you." The bus driver called out, "Last call for Mercy General." Ruth moved toward the step. That was when Daniel reached for her wrist. Not hard. But enough. "Ma'am, don't move." The station went quiet. And Ruth felt every eye on her. A poor woman stopped by police. A rich man accusing her. A bag full of papers nobody cared to read. She pulled her wrist back, and the bag slipped from her wet fingers. Everything spilled across the sidewalk. Medical forms. Bus tickets. A small bottle of pills. A photograph of Lily in a hospital gown, smiling with 2 thumbs up. And one sealed envelope. Daniel bent down to gather the papers before the rain ruined them. His hand touched the envelope. Then he stopped. Written across the front, in careful teenage handwriting, were the words. To Officer Daniel Brooks. If he ever comes. Daniel forgot the rain. He forgot Charles. He forgot the crowd. His throat tightened. "How do you know my name?" he asked Ruth. Ruth stared at him, confused. "I don't." Daniel picked up the envelope slowly. "Then why does your daughter have a letter addressed to me?" Ruth's lips parted. My daughter wrote that. She wouldn't tell me why. Charles stepped forward. Officer, this is not relevant. My check is missing. Daniel looked at him, then back at the letter. For a moment, something inside him shifted. A memory returned. 3 years earlier, Daniel had responded to a crash outside a grocery store. A pickup truck had run a red light and slammed into a sedan. Inside the sedan was a mother and a little girl with a backpack covered in purple stars. The mother had been unconscious. The girl had been trapped, bleeding, terrified. Daniel had crawled into the broken car through the back window and held her hand until firefighters cut the door open. The girl kept saying, "Don't let my mom die." Daniel had taken off his own jacket, wrapped it around her shoulders, and said, "Look at me. I'm not leaving." He never knew what happened to them after the ambulance left. He only remembered her eyes. Wide. Brave. Trying not to cry. Daniel looked at Ruth. Was your daughter ever in a car accident near Miller's grocery? Ruth covered her mouth. Yes. 3 years ago. Daniel looked down at Lily's hospital photo. The same eyes. The same purple star bracelet on her wrist. He opened the letter with hands that were no longer steady. The rain blurred the ink in places, but the words were still clear. Dear Officer Brooks. You probably don't remember me. I was the girl in the car accident near Miller's grocery. You held my hand and told me you were not leaving. I believed you. My mom says sometimes people come into your life for 1 minute, but that minute keeps you alive for years. I'm sick now. Mom says we have to be strong, but I can tell she cries in the bathroom. She is going to Mercy General today to ask for help. She is scared people won't listen because we don't have money or important last names. If you ever see her, please believe her. She is the best person I know. Daniel lowered the letter. The station was silent now. Even the teenager recording had stopped smiling. Ruth whispered, "She wrote that?" Daniel nodded, but he could not speak right away. Charles exhaled sharply. This is touching, officer, but my check. Daniel turned to him. Mr. Whitman, when did you last see the envelope? In my coat pocket. Which pocket? Charles reached into his coat automatically. His left pocket. Then his right. Then the inside pocket. His face changed. Slowly, he pulled out a white envelope, dry and untouched. The cashier's check was inside. No one moved. Charles stared at it, embarrassed. I must have put it in the wrong pocket. Ruth closed her eyes, the weight of humiliation crashing over her. Daniel's expression hardened. You accused her in public. You demanded I search her bag. You nearly made her miss a medical deadline. Charles looked around at the watching crowd. I made a mistake. Ruth bent to pick up her wet papers with shaking hands. Daniel knelt beside her immediately. No, ma'am. Let me. He gathered every document carefully, shielding them from the rain with his own body. Then he looked at the bus pulling away from the curb. Ruth saw it too. Her last bus to Mercy General disappeared into traffic. A small sound came from her mouth, almost like the air had been knocked out of her. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Daniel stood. I'll drive you. Charles shifted uncomfortably. Officer, I already said it was a mistake. Daniel looked at him with controlled anger. And now you're going to fix part of it. Charles frowned. What does that mean? You're on the hospital charity board, correct? That has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with it. Ruth shook her head quickly. Officer, please, I don't want trouble. Daniel's voice softened. Ruth, your daughter asked me to believe you. I do. Those words broke something open in her. Not because they solved everything. but because someone with a badge, someone with power, had finally looked at her and seen a human being. Daniel placed her bag in the patrol car and opened the back door. "No," he said, then paused and opened the front passenger door instead. "You sit here." Ruth hesitated. She had never ridden in the front of a police car. Charles watched as Daniel helped her inside. Then Daniel turned back to him. "Mr. Whitman, you're coming too." Charles blinked. "Excuse me? You made the accusation. You're going to Mercy General and explaining to that office why she was delayed." Charles wanted to refuse. But the crowd was still there. Phones were out. And reputation, to men like Charles Whitman, could be more frightening than truth. The drive to Mercy General was tense and quiet. Rain streaked across the windshield. Sirens stayed off, but Daniel moved with urgency. Ruth held Lily's letter in her lap. "I never knew your name," she said softly. "After the accident, I tried to find out who helped us. Nobody could tell me." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "I thought about that little girl for a long time." "She thought about you too," Ruth said. "After the accident, when she was scared at night, she'd say, 'The officer didn't leave.' So I won't give up." Daniel swallowed hard. He had joined the police force because of his father, a retired officer who believed the badge was not about control. It was about protection. But the job had made Daniel guarded. Every day he saw lies, anger, danger, and pain. Over time, suspicion became easier than compassion. Now a sick girl's letter had reminded him of the man he wanted to be. They reached Mercy General at 5:58 p.m. Ruth ran through the glass doors with Daniel beside her and Charles trailing behind. The foundation office was on the second floor. The receptionist was closing her computer when they arrived. "I'm sorry," she said. "Office hours are over." Ruth held out the damp folder. "Please. My daughter's name is Lily Coleman. I was delayed. I have everything." The receptionist looked tired, not cruel, but unmoved. "You'll have to come back Monday." Ruth's face fell. Daniel stepped forward. "Ma'am, this delay happened during a police matter. She was wrongfully held up." The receptionist looked at his badge, then at Charles. Charles cleared his throat. "I'm Charles Whitman. I'm on the foundation board." The receptionist straightened immediately. Charles looked at Ruth, then at the wet papers in her hands. For the first time that evening, he really saw her. Not as an inconvenience. Not as a stranger near his SUV. As a mother who had been running through the rain with her child's life in a bag. His voice lowered. "Accept the application." The receptionist hesitated. "Mr. Whitman, the deadline." "I said accept it." Ruth looked stunned. The papers were stamped at 6:03 p.m. But the story did not end there. Daniel asked if he could visit Lily. Ruth led him to the pediatric wing, where the lights were soft and the hallway smelled like sanitizer and cafeteria soup. Lily was sitting up in bed, drawing stars on the edge of a paper cup. When she saw the uniform, her face went still. Then her eyes widened. "Officer Brooks?" Daniel smiled gently. "Hi, Lily." She looked at her mother, then back at him. "You came?" Daniel held up the letter. "You asked me to." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she tried to laugh. "I didn't think you'd actually see it." "I almost didn't," Daniel said. "But I'm glad I did." Ruth sat beside her daughter and took her hand. "We got the documents in." Lily closed her eyes in relief. Charles stood in the doorway, uncomfortable in a place where money could not make him taller than anyone else. Lily noticed him. "Who is that?" Ruth glanced at him. "A man who made a mistake." Charles stepped into the room slowly. He was used to boardrooms, contracts, charity dinners, and applause. He was not used to a hospital room where a sick teenager looked at him without fear or admiration. Just truth. "I owe your mother an apology," he said. Lily looked at Ruth. Ruth said nothing. Charles continued, "I accused her of something she didn't do. I judged her because I was careless and proud. I'm sorry." Ruth's eyes stayed on her daughter. Lily studied him. "My mom works harder than anyone I know." "I believe that now," Charles said. Lily's voice was weak, but steady. "You should have believed it before." The room went quiet. And Charles Whitman had no answer. The following Monday, the foundation board met in a conference room overlooking downtown Columbus. Ruth sat at one end of the table in her cleanest dress, hands folded tightly. Daniel was there as a witness. Charles was there too. The board reviewed Lily's case. Medical need was urgent. Documentation was complete. But one board member questioned the cost. "We have limited funds," she said. "Approving one case at this level means denying others." Ruth looked down. She understood limited funds. She had lived inside limited funds her entire life. Then Charles stood. "I'll cover the portion the foundation can't." Everyone turned. He looked at Ruth, then at Daniel. "And I'm resigning from the Emergency Review Committee." A man beside him frowned. "Charles, that's not necessary." "It is," Charles said. "Because I forgot what this work is supposed to be about." He placed a check on the table. Not for reputation. Not for a gala photo. But because a poor woman in the rain had exposed something ugly in him, and a sick girl in a hospital bed had said what no adult in his world dared to say. You should have believed it before. Lily's treatment was approved that afternoon. It did not make life suddenly easy. Real life does not turn into a fairy tale overnight. There were still hospital visits, hard mornings, bills, and fear. But there was also hope. Daniel visited when he could, sometimes bringing books, sometimes bringing terrible vending machine hot chocolate that made Lily laugh. Ruth kept working, but now she carried herself differently. Not because rich people had helped her. Because she had survived being humiliated and still refused to become bitter. Months later, on a bright Sunday morning, Lily walked into a small church in a blue dress, thinner than before but smiling. The congregation stood and clapped. Ruth cried quietly in the front row. Daniel stood in the back, out of uniform, hands folded in front of him. Charles sat 2 rows behind Ruth, not in the front where important people usually sit, but among everyone else. After the service, Lily gave Daniel a folded piece of paper. "Another letter?" he asked. She nodded. "This one is shorter." He opened it. "Thank you for not leaving again." Daniel looked up, his eyes wet. "I never should have needed a letter to do the right thing," he said. Lily smiled. "Maybe everyone needs a reminder sometimes." Across the church lawn, Ruth watched Charles approach her. He held no camera, no speech, no oversized check. Just a quiet face. "I started a new rule at the foundation," he said. "No emergency case can be rejected until the family is heard in person." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. "That's good. I know it doesn't erase what I did." "No," Ruth said softly. "It doesn't." Charles nodded, accepting that. Then Ruth added, "But it means the next mother may not have to beg in the rain." Charles lowered his eyes. "That's what I'm hoping." A few weeks later, Daniel returned to the transit station where it had all happened. The rain was gone. The sidewalk was dry. People rushed in and out with coffee cups, suitcases, backpacks, and tired faces. He stood near the curb and remembered Ruth's wrist in his hand. He remembered the crowd staring. He remembered how close he had come to treating her like a problem instead of a person. That day changed him. Not because he had done something heroic, but because he had almost failed someone who needed him. From then on, when Daniel stopped someone, questioned someone, or answered a call, he remembered the letter in the poor woman's bag. He remembered that every person carries something unseen. A diagnosis. A funeral notice. A child waiting. A second job. A fear they cannot explain. A letter written in hope. And sometimes, the difference between cruelty and kindness is just one extra minute to listen. Ruth never became rich. Lily never became famous. Daniel never told the story at a press conference. But in that small corner of Ohio, people still talked about the evening a poor woman was stopped in the rain, accused in front of strangers, and nearly crushed by one man's assumption. They talked about the officer who opened a letter and found a promise he had forgotten he made. And they talked about the girl who reminded them all of something simple. You can measure a person by their clothes, their car, their address, or their bank account. But you will almost always measure them wrong. Because the richest thing a person can carry is not money. Sometimes, it is love. Sometimes, it is courage. And sometimes, it is a folded letter in an old canvas bag, waiting for the right heart to read it.